What if the crushing weight of grief led you to an unexpected connection that would change your life forever? What if the pain of losing someone opened the door to a second chance at love, family, and purpose? Where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us how fragile and how beautiful life can be. The rain rolled softly over the gray stones of Willow Creek Cemetery, carrying with it the silence of the forgotten. Matthew Cole, a billionaire at 46, stood motionless before his wife's headstone, his tailored coat soaked through without him caring. To the world, Matthew was an icon of Wall Street, a man whose face adorned magazines and whose every move shifted markets. But here, at his wife Hannah's grave, he was just a man, stripped of everything that mattered. 3 years had passed since her sudden heart attack had stolen her laughter, and in all those years, Matthew had never missed a Saturday visit. He would trace the carved letters of her name and whisper the apologies that gnawed at him. Apologies for late nights at the office, for arguments never resolved, for assuming they had more time. But as he knelt in the drizzle, brushing wet leaves from the granite, a faint sound pulled him from his ritual. It was the sound of muffled sobs, fragile yet piercing, carried on the wind. Matthew's head turned. Across the cemetery, beneath an old oak, a young woman sat huddled against a headstone. Her hair was plastered to her face by the rain, her body trembling with grief. She clutched a single daisy, its petals drooping like her spirit. For a moment, Matthew told himself it wasn't his place. He wasn't one to intrude on another's grief. But something about her, the way her pain mirrored his own, kept him rooted to the spot, unable to turn away. Why did it feel like fate had placed her here at the exact moment he needed someone most? Finally, Matthew rose and crossed the damp grass, each step heavier than the last. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice almost swallowed by the rain. The young woman flinched, her head snapping up. Her face was pale, her brown eyes swollen from crying, her diner uniform damp beneath a faded blue coat. A small name tag caught his eye. "Claire." "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She shook her head quickly, swiping at her tears. I'm fine, just visiting." Her voice cracked, betraying her pain. Matthew's eyes lowered to the headstone. Margaret Dawson, 1966 to 2024. Beloved mother. She had been young, too young. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to intrude. I know how it feels." Her gaze lifted, cautious yet curious. "You lost someone too?" He nodded, his voice rough. "My wife, 3 years ago." Claire's eyes softened, the faintest flicker of recognition sparking between two strangers bound by loss. "I'm here for my mom. Cancer. Just a few months ago." The word landed like a stone between them, heavy, unyielding. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain filling the spaces their words couldn't reach. Then Matthew gestured gently to the patch of ground beside her. "Mind if I sit?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He lowered himself onto the wet grass, ignoring the water soaking his coat. "I'm Matthew," he said finally. She sniffled, managing a whisper. "Claire." They exchanged nothing more, but the quiet connection hung between them like a fragile thread. When Claire stood to leave, Matthew felt an unexpected pang of loss. "Will you be here next week?" he asked before he could stop himself. She paused, her eyes searching his. "Maybe," she said softly, then disappeared into the mist. Why did the thought of never seeing her again unsettle him more than he expected? The following Monday, Matthew found himself parked outside Sonny's, a retro spot with neon signs and checkered floors. He told himself it was coincidence, curiosity, nothing more. But deep down he knew better. Inside, warmth and noise filled the air, clinking plates, sizzling bacon, laughter. And there she was,
behind the counter, pouring coffee for a trucker with a weary smile. Matthew looked different here, less fragile, more composed, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. He slid into a booth, his expensive suit out of place among the regulars. When Claire approached, her eyes widened in surprise. "You," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Needed a coffee," he shrugged lightly. She set a mug down in front of him. "Been working here long?" "5 years," she said simply. "Pays the bills and keeps me busy." Her tone was casual, but Matthew sensed there was a whole world buried in those words. What exactly had life taken from her, and why couldn't he shake the urge to find out? Over the next hour, between pouring coffee and checking on other tables, Claire shared fragments of her life. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment with her mom, who'd worked herself sick just to keep the lights on. After her passing, Claire was left caring for her 16-year-old brother, Evan, who was now fighting leukemia. Her voice trembled when she spoke of him, and Matthew felt a familiar ache, that powerless frustration in the face of illness. In turn, he shared pieces of Hannah, not the glamorous magazine version, but the real woman. How she'd hum off-key while cooking, how she'd paint wildflowers across their kitchen walls, how he'd give anything for one more morning with her. Claire listened, really listened, her eyes steady on his. When he left, he felt the world felt just slightly less heavy. But was he imagining this fragile connection, or was it real? Over the weeks, Matthew and Claire fell into a quiet rhythm. Every Saturday at the cemetery, they found each other, two mourners bound by love and loss. They'd sit near their headstones, sharing memories of those gone. Matthew would tell her about Hannah's unstoppable laugh.
Claire, about her mother's cookies that filled their apartment with sweetness. Slowly, the walls they had built around their hearts began to crack. One gray morning under the oak, Claire whispered, "Do you think it ever stops hurting?" Matthew stared at Hannah's name etched in stone. "I don't think it does. But maybe it gets easier to carry." Claire's eyes glistened. "I want to believe that." Their bond was fragile, but undeniable. Yet Matthew wondered, how long could grief be the only thing holding them together? One October afternoon, Matthew arrived at the cemetery to find Claire already there, her face pale, her hands clutching a crumpled litter. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarm threading his voice. Her words came out in a whisper. "It's Evan, the doctors. They don't think he'll make it to Christmas." Matthew's chest tightened. He had never met Evan, but through Claire's stories, he felt like he knew him. Her pain seared through him. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "I keep thinking if I'd been there more for my mom, if I hadn't pushed her away when she was sick, maybe I'd know how to help him. But I was so scared, Matthew. I failed them both." The guilt in her voice mirrored his own. He thought of Hannah, how he had worked late nights, how he assumed they'd have time to fix their distance. He reached for her trembling hand. "I know that guilt," he said quietly. "But love is what matters, Claire. You loved your mom, and you love Evan. That's enough." Her hand tightened around his, and in that fragile moment, they held each other up. But was his comfort enough to save her from despair? That night, Matthew made a decision. He had spent years running from his wealth, ashamed that it couldn't save Hannah. But maybe, just maybe, it could save someone else. He called his lawyers, and within days, the Hannah Cole Foundation was born, dedicated to supporting families battling terminal illness. He poured millions into funding medical treatments, research, and support systems for families like Claire's. For weeks, he didn't tell her. He didn't want it to feel like pity. He wanted it to be real. But when he finally shared the news one late evening at the diner, Claire froze, her coffee pot dangling midair. You did this for Hannah." Matthew nodded. "For her.
And for people like you and Evan, I can't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, it could change something now." Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, but her smile was unguarded, pure. "You're a good man, Matthew Cole." He chuckled, the sound rusty with disuse. "I'm just trying." But deep down, he wondered, had Hannah somehow led him here, to Claire? Inspired by his actions, Claire launched her own project, a grief support group at the community center. She called it Healing Hearts, a place where people could share stories without judgment. Matthew attended the very first meeting, sitting quietly among strangers as they shared their raw pain. It was messy, honest, and strangely cathartic. For the first time in years, Matthew felt like he belonged somewhere again. His bond with Claire grew stronger, not yet romantic, but something deeper, built on shared wounds and newfound purpose. Still, both of them wondered silently, what would happen when grief was no longer their only tie? Months passed, and Evan's condition worsened. Claire spent every spare moment at the hospital, her hope fraying thread by thread. Matthew did what he could, paying for experimental treatments, pulling strings with top doctors. Yet he knew money couldn't buy miracles. Then one morning, Claire burst into the diner, her face radiant with disbelief. "Matthew, you won't believe this. Evan's tests, they're clear. The cancer's gone. He's in remission." Her voice trembled with joy. Matthew stared, stunned, his chest flooding with relief. "That's incredible." Claire laughed, the sound bubbling out like sunlight. "I don't care what the doctors say. I know your support made the difference. It gave me strength, and somehow it reached him. I know it did." Matthew shook his head humbly. "This was Evan's fight, and yours. You carried him through." But as she threw her arms around him in a fierce hug, he realized she had carried him through too. But a question lingered. What did this connection between them truly mean? That night, sitting together in the diner's dim parking lot, Claire looked at Matthew with quiet resolve. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to go back to school for social work. I want to help people like you do. But I'm scared it's too late." Matthew reached for her hand, his voice steady. "It's never too late, Claire. You've already changed lives, mine included. You can do anything." She smiled through tears, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't dared to imagine in years. A future. But could he really allow himself to let Hannah go? A year later, Matthew returned to Willow Creek Cemetery one last time. The air was crisp with autumn, golden leaves scattered across the ground. He knelt at Hannah's headstone, his fingers brushing over her name. His voice was soft, steady. "Thank you, Hannah, for loving me, for teaching me how to live. I'll always love you. But I think I'm ready to let you go." He stood slowly, his chest no longer hollow but full. Claire was waiting beneath the oak, her hair catching the sunlight, her smile radiant. Evan was healthy again, back in school, his laughter filling their days. Claire had enrolled in college, her support group thriving. And Matthew? He was no longer a ghost of grief, but a man alive with purpose, standing beside someone who understood every scar he carried. As he reached for Claire's hand, and she laced her fingers through his, they turned from the graves towards the horizon. The past had not been erased, but it had been transformed into the foundation of something new. Together, they walked forward, not as two broken souls, but as partners who had built a future from love, healing, and second chances.